When I walked up to Mr. Richardson at the company Christmas party in my red cocktail dress, I thought I was being charming and helpful for Tom's career. I had no idea I was about to trigger the most brutal public humiliation of my life. Tom's financial firm had spared no expense for their annual holiday celebration, and the guest list included everyone from junior analysts to senior partners, plus their significant others. I'd spent weeks shopping for the perfect dress, finally settling on a form-fitting red number that hugged my curves and made me feel confident and sophisticated. He'd been working toward a promotion for months, putting in long hours and taking on extra projects, and tonight was his chance to show the partners that he was ready for more responsibility. I wanted to help him succeed, to be the kind of girlfriend who enhanced his professional image rather than hindering it. Mr. Richardson was standing alone at the bar, looking distinguished in his expensive navy suit, his silver hair perfectly styled and his wedding ring catching the light as he lifted his whiskey glass. He was exactly the kind of powerful, successful man who had always made me feel slightly nervous and excited. At 45, he had the confidence that came with years of making important decisions and commanding respect from everyone around him. The flirtation escalated when Richardson asked me to dance, extending his hand with the kind of old-fashioned gallantry that made me feel special and desired. The slow song that was playing provided the perfect excuse to get closer to him, and I accepted his invitation with enthusiasm, not bothering to look around for Tom before following Richardson onto the dance floor. As we swayed to the music, Richardson's hand rested on the small of my back, and he complimented my dress, my perfume, my smile. I felt beautiful and powerful, like I was living in a movie where the handsome older man was captivated by the charming younger woman. The attention was intoxicating, especially after months of feeling like Tom was too focused on work to really see me anymore. That's when Tom appeared beside us on the dance floor, his face pale and his jaw set in a way I'd never seen before. He politely asked Richardson if he could have a word with me, his voice carefully controlled, but with an undertone that made my stomach flutter with nervousness. Richardson released me with obvious reluctance, making a comment about how lucky Tom was to have such a delightful girlfriend. Tom led me to a quiet corner near the coat check, where the music was slightly muted, and we could speak without being overheard by the other guests. His hands were shaking slightly, as he asked me what I thought I was doing, whether I understood how inappropriate my behaviour looked to everyone in the room. I felt defensive immediately, insisting that I was just being friendly and polite, that networking was important for his career, and I was helping him make connections. When Tom asked me to stop flirting so obviously with his boss, I accused him of being jealous and controlling, of not trusting me to handle myself in a professional setting. I told him he was embarrassing me by acting possessive in front of important people, and that maybe if he paid half as much attention to me as he did to his spreadsheets, I wouldn't need to find conversation elsewhere. I'd always been the kind of person who thrived on male attention, who felt most confident when men were looking at me with desire and appreciation. Growing up, I'd been the girl who flirted with teachers for better grades, who dated the most popular guys in school, who learned early that my smile and my willingness to be charming could open doors and create opportunities. Tom had been different from the start. When we met 18 months ago at a mutual friend's birthday party, he hadn't tried to impress me with expensive gifts or smooth talk. Instead, he'd engaged me in genuine conversation, asked thoughtful questions about my work in marketing, and listened to my answers with real interest. He was steady and reliable in ways that had initially seemed boring but had gradually become comforting. Our relationship had developed slowly and naturally, without the drama and intensity I'd grown accustomed to in my previous relationships. Tom didn't play games or make me guess how he felt about me. He was consistent in his affection, supportive of my career goals, and clearly committed to building something lasting together. When he'd suggested we move in together 6 months ago, it had felt like the natural next step rather than a dramatic declaration. The Christmas party represented everything I found frustrating about Tom's world: formal, conservative, focused on hierarchy and professional relationships rather than genuine connection. I'd attended several of his work events over the months we'd been together, and they always felt like performances where everyone was playing roles rather than being themselves. I'd noticed Richardson at previous company gatherings, had been aware of his authority and influence over Tom's future. He was exactly the type of man who had always attracted me. Confident, powerful, sophisticated in ways that Tom's quiet competence couldn't match. When I'd decided to approach him at the party, I'd told myself I was networking for Tom's benefit, but the truth was more complicated. After my confrontation with Tom, Richardson suggested we get some fresh air on the hotel's rooftop terrace, away from the noise and crowd of the party. The December air was cold, but the view of the city lights was spectacular, and Richardson offered me his suit jacket when I shivered. The gesture felt intimate and protective, and when he moved closer to keep me warm, I didn't step away. We spent almost 20 minutes alone on that terrace, talking about everything except Tom or work, or the professional relationships that should have made our interaction inappropriate. Richardson told me about his travels, his appreciation for art and fine wine, his thoughts on books I'd mentioned enjoying. I felt sophisticated and worldly in a way that Tom's earnest discussions about financial planning had never made me feel. When Richardson suggested we return to the party, before people began to wonder where we'd gone, his hand lingered on my lower back as he guided me toward the door. The touch felt deliberate and meaningful, and I found myself hoping that Tom would notice how captivated his boss had become with his girlfriend. I found Tom standing with a group of other junior employees, holding a glass of wine that looked untouched, and wearing an expression of forced cheerfulness that didn't reach his eyes. When he saw me approaching, he excused himself from the conversation and walked toward me with deliberate steps, his posture rigid and his jaw clenched. Tom's response was polite but cold, thanking Richardson for his kind words while his eyes never left my face. I could see the hurt and anger building behind his careful professional mask, but I felt defensive rather than apologetic. I hadn't done anything wrong by having an intellectual conversation with an interesting man, and Tom's obvious discomfort only reinforced my belief that he was being unreasonably possessive. When Richardson excused himself to speak with other guests, Tom immediately asked me to step outside with him for a private conversation. His tone was carefully controlled, but I could hear the strain in his voice, could see the way his hands were trembling slightly as he set his wine glass down on a nearby table. In the hotel lobby, away from his colleagues and the Christmas party atmosphere, Tom's composure finally cracked. He asked me if I had any idea how my behaviour looked to everyone in that room, whether I understood that I'd just spent 20 minutes alone with his boss, while looking like I was on a date rather than attending a company function with my boyfriend. I tried to explain that Richardson and I had simply been having a stimulating conversation, that Tom was reading inappropriate meaning into what had been perfectly innocent interaction. When he pointed out that I'd been touching Richardson's arm, laughing too loudly at his jokes, and gazing at him with obvious fascination, I accused Tom of spying on me and being ridiculously jealous. The argument escalated quickly, with Tom insisting that I was being deliberately obtuse about the signals I'd been sending, and me maintaining that he was projecting his own insecurities onto a harmless social interaction. When he asked me to promise that I would keep my distance from Richardson for the rest of the evening, I refused, telling him that I wasn't going to let his paranoia control my behaviour at a party where I was supposed to be helping his career. Tom's face went completely white when I said that, and he stood there staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. After a long moment, he told me that he was going back to the party and that I could do whatever I wanted, but that he wouldn't be watching anymore. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the hotel lobby in my red dress, feeling simultaneously vindicated and inexplicably hollow. Tom stayed at the party, but kept his distance, socializing with his colleagues and maintaining his professional demeanor, even though I could feel his eyes on me throughout the night. Every time I glanced in his direction, he looked away immediately, but not before I caught the expression of pain and disappointment on his face. As the evening wound down, Richardson suggested that we extend the night at the hotel bar, just the two of us, so we could continue our conversation without the noise and interruption of the company party. The invitation felt loaded with possibility, and for a moment I seriously considered accepting, imagining what it might be like to be with a man who had the confidence and sophistication that Tom lacked. But something about the way Richardson was looking at me, with an intensity that felt predatory rather than romantic, made me hesitate. When I glanced across the room and saw Tom helping elderly colleagues with their coats, displaying the same thoughtful consideration he'd always shown me, I felt a stab of guilt that cut through my champagne-fueled confidence. I declined Richardson's invitation, claiming I was tired and needed to get home, but the damage had already been done. As I collected my coat and purse, preparing to leave the party, I could feel the stares and whispered conversations following me. Tom's colleagues had been watching my interaction with their boss all evening, and their expressions ranged from amused to disapproving to openly judgmental. The apartment felt cold and empty when I arrived, and I realized that Tom had probably decided to stay late at the party, networking with colleagues and trying to repair whatever damage my behavior might have caused to his professional relationships. I went to bed alone, still wearing my red dress, and lay awake wondering whether I'd made a terrible mistake. The next morning, Tom was already gone when I woke up, and he'd left no note or message about his plans for the day. His side of the bed was perfectly made, as if he'd barely slept, and his coffee cup was washed and put away in the kitchen. The apartment felt eerily normal, except for the absence of all the small signs of affection that usually marked the beginning of our days together. I spent Saturday trying to focus on work projects and household tasks, but I kept checking my phone for messages from Tom that never came. When he finally returned home that evening, he was carrying a bottle of wine and wearing an expression of determined cheerfulness that immediately put me on edge. Tom suggested we order takeout and have a quiet evening together, and his tone was so carefully neutral that I couldn't tell whether he was trying to make peace or simply avoiding another confrontation. We ate dinner while watching a Netflix series we'd been following together, maintaining conversation about plot points and character development, while carefully avoiding any mention of the previous night's party. When I finally worked up the courage to ask him about the party, Tom's response was measured and emotionless. He said that several people had commented on how much Richardson had seemed to enjoy my company, and that his boss had made some remarks about my charm and intelligence that had felt inappropriate in a professional context. I tried to defend my behavior again, insisting that I'd done nothing wrong by being friendly and engaging with important people at his company event. Tom listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, but his expression never changed from that same careful neutrality that was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. When I finished my explanations and justifications, Tom simply said that he understood my perspective and that he hoped I'd had a good time at the party. Then he returned his attention to the television, effectively ending the conversation without resolving anything or even acknowledging that there was a problem between us. The following Monday brought the first real indication of how seriously Tom was taking the situation. When I came home from work, I found him sitting at our kitchen table with his laptop open and papers spread around him like he was working on some kind of project. He looked up when I entered, and for the first time since the party, his expression was completely genuine and completely devastating. Tom said that he'd arranged for both of us to attend a New Year's Eve party at Richardson's house, an exclusive gathering for senior management and their most promising employees. Tom had requested the invitation specifically, explaining to his boss that he wanted to bring his girlfriend to meet Richardson's wife and integrate more fully into the company's social network. The invitation had been enthusiastically granted, with Richardson expressing particular pleasure at the prospect of seeing me again and getting to know me better in a more intimate social setting. Tom showed me the email exchange, where his boss had made several comments about my intelligence and charm that felt inappropriate and unprofessional, exactly the kind of boundary crossing that Tom had warned me about. The party had a sophisticated, intimate atmosphere that felt very different from the larger company Christmas celebration. People were dressed more casually, conversations were more personal, and there was a sense of being welcomed into Richardson's private world rather than attending a professional obligation. As midnight approached, Richardson suggested that the party move to his home office, where he had an excellent view of the city's fireworks display and a private bar stocked with his finest liquor. The invitation was extended to everyone, but the office could only comfortably hold about 15 people, so the group naturally divided into those who were interested in the exclusive viewing party and those who preferred to stay in the main living areas. Tom immediately accepted the invitation on behalf of both of us, and Richardson's face lit up with obvious pleasure at the prospect of having me in his private space. Mrs. Richardson chose to stay with the larger group, citing a headache and a desire to help the catering staff with cleanup, which meant that the office gathering would be predominantly male colleagues. At exactly 11:58 p.m., as the countdown to midnight was beginning and Richardson was suggesting that he and I watch the fireworks from his private balcony, Tom stood up and asked for everyone's attention. The conversation in the office died immediately, and all eyes turned to him as he began to speak in the same clear, professional voice he used for client presentations. He began by thanking Richardson for being such an exceptional boss and mentor, someone who had taught him important lessons about leadership, professional boundaries, and the importance of integrity in business relationships. The compliments were beautifully delivered and seemed completely sincere, and Richardson was clearly pleased by the public recognition of his influence and guidance. Then Tom shifted his focus to me, describing me as an incredibly instructive girlfriend who had taught him valuable lessons about trust, loyalty, and the importance of paying attention to the people we love. He thanked me for helping him understand what he really valued in a relationship and for showing him exactly what kind of behavior he should expect from a life partner. As Tom spoke, the atmosphere in the office became increasingly uncomfortable. Richardson's hand had moved away from my thigh, and he was looking at Tom with growing confusion and concern. The other guests were exchanging glances, clearly sensing that something was wrong, but not understanding what was happening. Tom's tone remained perfectly professional and courteous throughout his speech, but the content was becoming more pointed and specific. He began describing particular moments from the Christmas party, thanking Richardson for demonstrating such active mentorship by taking such a personal interest in his girlfriend's intellectual development. He expressed appreciation for the private conversations and individual attention that his boss had shown me, noting how much more instruction I'd received than any other employee's partner. Then Tom pulled out his phone and began showing screenshots to the room, images of text messages between Richardson and me that I didn't even remember sending. Messages where Richardson had complimented my appearance, suggested private meetings to discuss business opportunities, and made comments about how much he'd enjoyed our time together at the Christmas party. The screenshots revealed a pattern of communication that had continued for weeks after the party, with Richardson finding excuses to text me about work-related matters that gradually became more personal and inappropriate. The messages showed him asking about my schedule, complimenting my intelligence and beauty, and suggesting meetings that had nothing to do with business. What made the evidence even more damaging was that Tom had documentation of my responses, which showed me encouraging Richardson's attention, expressing interest in private meetings, and making comments about how much more sophisticated and interesting he was than other men in my life. The text exchange painted a picture of an emotional affair that had been developing for weeks, with both parties clearly interested in taking their relationship beyond professional boundaries. As Tom continued reading selected messages aloud to the horrified gathering, Richardson's face went completely white and then bright red. His wife, who had apparently heard the commotion and come to investigate, arrived in the doorway just in time to hear her husband's text messages being read to a room full of their closest friends and his professional colleagues. The final element of Tom's presentation was a video that someone had taken at the Christmas party, showing Richardson and me dancing together, talking intimately at the bar, and disappearing together onto the hotel terrace. Tom had obtained the video from a colleague who had thought it was amusing, and he played it for the entire room on Richardson's own office television. When the presentation concluded, Tom thanked everyone for their attention and announced that he would be resigning from the company effective immediately, since he felt that the professional environment had become too complicated for him to continue working productively. He also announced that he and I would be ending our relationship, since we had clearly demonstrated our incompatibility and different values regarding trust and commitment. The room was completely silent as Tom gathered his coat and prepared to leave the party. Richardson was staring at him with a mixture of fury and disbelief, while Mrs. Richardson was staring at her husband with an expression that promised serious consequences for his behaviour. The other guests were looking anywhere except at the three principals in the drama, clearly desperate to escape the uncomfortable situation. As Tom walked toward the door, he turned back and delivered his final comment to the room. He said that he hoped everyone had learned as much from the evening as he had, and that he wished Richardson and me all the happiness we deserved in whatever relationship we decided to pursue together. Then he left, walking out of Richardson's house and out of both of our lives forever. The aftermath was swift and devastating for everyone involved. Mrs. Richardson immediately demanded that all the guests leave her home, and within 15 minutes the New Year's Eve party had completely disbanded. Richardson's colleagues filed out in uncomfortable silence, and I was left standing alone in his office, still holding a glass of champagne, with no way to get home and no idea how to begin explaining what had just happened. Richardson was furious with me, blaming me for encouraging Tom's investigation and for somehow orchestrating the public humiliation that had just destroyed his marriage and damaged his professional reputation in front of his most important colleagues. When I tried to explain that I'd had no idea what Tom was planning, Richardson accused me of being either incredibly naive or deliberately deceptive, neither of which reflected well on my character or intelligence. Mrs. Richardson made it clear that I was no longer welcome in their home and that she would be filing for divorce immediately, citing her husband's inappropriate relationship with a subordinate's girlfriend as grounds for ending their 20-year marriage. The conversation I overheard between them as I waited for my taxi suggested that this incident was the final straw in a pattern of infidelity and disrespect that had been building for years. The video of Tom's speech had been recorded by multiple guests on their phones, and by the time I got home, it was already circulating on social media. The story was compelling and dramatic, a young employee's perfect revenge against his cheating girlfriend and predatory boss, and it quickly went viral beyond just our immediate social circle. Within days, the video had been shared thousands of times, with commentary and analysis from people who had never met any of us, but felt qualified to judge our behaviour and character. Tom was largely portrayed as a hero who had stood up for himself against betrayal, while Richardson and I were vilified as examples of workplace harassment and relationship infidelity. My own career suffered as well, as the story spread through professional networks and social media. Potential employers could easily find the video and the extensive online commentary about my character and behaviour, making it nearly impossible for me to find new opportunities in marketing or any other field that required trust and professional judgment. Tom disappeared completely after that night, and despite my attempts to contact him and explain or apologise, he never responded to any of my messages. His social media accounts were deleted, his phone number was changed, and mutual friends said they had no idea where he had gone or how to reach him. Sometimes a joke isn't funny to anyone but you, and sometimes revenge destroys the person seeking it just as thoroughly as it destroys their targets. One night of flirtation, one speech of retribution, and one viral video had changed all of our lives forever, leaving nothing but regret and the permanent reminder that in the age of social media, our worst moments can define us forever. If this story made you think about the power of our choices and their consequences, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about relationships and revenge. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss what happens when ordinary people make extraordinary mistakes. And remember, in the age of social media, there are no private moments anymore. What city are you watching from? Let me know in the comments and tell me, have you ever seen someone's joke destroy their life?